I don't know if I stopped the video or not. I did. I stopped the video again. Um, I forgot to put my book underneath this because that keeps me from touching that little button. So that means is that there will be two links again. One of these days I'll manage this. But anyway, he's twisting his gloves in a string. I don't. I've done that a million times. I know exactly what that is. Um, so he's watching this and he's looking at the scenery, and the curtains are drawn back upon the scene beside the Stilt. That's a river in Belgium. That's he's or she's set in this scene, and down at the bottom is a kind of a weird image of the hunter. It flashed across him that this was something like buck fever, the paralyzing moment that comes upon a man when his first elk looks at him through the bushes under its great antlers, the moment when a man's mind is so full of shooting that he forgets the gun in his hand until the buck is gone. This is the kind of thing he is anticipating. He's fearful for Taya, and he's anticipating that the moment is here. I don't hunt. I don't shoot anything. So this, to me, this image was kind of jarring. Um, and I don't really comprehend that concept of buck fever, except that I can understand his anticipation. Um, Over on page 369, um, I have a note to myself here. My notes are not ever identified with page numbers, so they're kind of tricky. But if we look over on page 369, the king interrupted her. She began in Lichterwaffenschein, and that means, I don't know. Oh, here. Lonely in troubled days in splendid shining armor. Um, So she's now in the part. She's on the stage and she's in the part. He felt, let's see, his power of attention was not great just then, but insofar as it went, he seemed to be looking through an exalted calmness at a beautiful woman from far away, from another sort of life, feeling and understanding than his own, who had in her face something he had known long ago, much brightened and beautified. As a lad, he used to believe that the faces of people who died were like that in the next world, the same faces but shining with the light of a new understanding. He doesn't understand Wagnerian opera as well as some of the other people in the audience, but he can see in her this shining moment. This is an important passage, one that deserves a star. What he felt was admiration and estrangement. The homely reunion that he had somehow expected now seemed foolish between him and Taya. Instead of feeling proud that he knew her better than all these people about him, he felt chagrined at his own ingenuousness, for he did not know her better. This woman he had never known. This new woman, this artist. She had somehow devoured his little friend, Taya the little girl, as the wolf ate up Red Riding Hood. Beautiful, radiant, tender as she was, she chilled his old affection. That sort of feeling was no longer appropriate. She seemed much, much farther away from him than she had seemed all those years when she was in Germany. The ocean he could not cross, but there was something here he could not cross. And he has come to the realization that she is now beyond her old little self. Next paragraph. And after the tenor came on, the doctor ceased trying to make the woman before him fit into any of his cherished recollections. A few lines later, he knew no more about her than did the hundreds around him who sat in the shadow and looked on as he looked, some with more understanding, some with less. So he's part of the audience. He is no longer her fatherly figure, her friend. He's also observing. Down at the bottom of this paragraph, attitudes, movements, her face, her white arms and fingers, everything was suffused with a rosy tenderness, a warm humility, a gracious and yet to him wholly estranging beauty. She has now become the artist other. Down at the bottom of page 370, he had begun indeed to feel the exhilaration of getting free from personalities, of being released from his own past as well as from Taya Kronberg. And then at the end of that paragraph at the top is 371, Archie did his part in the applause that greeted her, but it was the new and wonderful he applauded, not the old and dear. His personal, proprietary pride in her was frozen out. She's stepped beyond. If we go to page 372 at the top of the page, she looked, the doctor told himself with a sinking heart, 40 years old. So the strain is apparent, and yet she is radiant. She has become this other artist. If we look at the top of page 373, she was standing in the middle of the room in a white silk shirtwaist and a short black velvet skirt, which somehow suggested that they had cut off her petticoats all around and about. She looked distinctly clipped and plucked. Um, Interesting because she has, this is some years later and she is now successful, but there's all kinds of little tidbits in here about progress. There are, uh, for example, on the road, and we'll see this image where cars and carriages are now mixed, and there are electric lights, and her clothing has changed as it did at the time. Towards the bottom of page 373, she seemed to him inappropriately young and inappropriately old, shorn of her long tresses at one end and of her long ropes at the other. She's become this other. It's different. She's in New York City. At the top of page 374. I'm sure if you've ever even walked down streets in Chicago, uh, the fashion is just one step ahead. The what people are wearing is that much more than what we see in a downtown street here in Milwaukee. Same thing with New York. Top of page 374. Uh, They seldom send up enough for one, she spoke bitterly. I haven't gotten a sense of you yet, turning directly to Archie again. You haven't been here. You've only announced yourself and told me you were coming tomorrow. You haven't seen me either. This is not I, but I'll be here waiting for you tomorrow, all of me. So it's kind of like what Ottenberg had said. Don't call on her before she sings. Let her just be who she needs to be in order to be this other artist. Oh, yeah. And then here in the next chapter, a moment later, Fred's voice reached him over the telephone. We haven't seen telephones in this book yet, um, but they're ringing up. If you look on page 375, well, if you'll believe me, I had the brutality to go and see her. I wanted to couldn't identify her, couldn't wait. And his curiosity was more than he could bear. Next paragraph. She seemed rather dazed and pretty well used up. She seemed disappointed in herself and said she hadn't done herself justice in the balcony scene. So she's, like many artists, very critical of herself. And I'm sure Cather experienced this too, because this development of the artist is really Cather's experience. And she must have been, like many people who write, uh, working it, working it, and working it, like Taya is dissatisfied with how she performed tonight. Next page, 376. Um, let's see. The general excitement got hold of me, I suppose. She was all right then. You aren't disappointed? Disappointed, my dear Archie, that's the high voice we dream of, so pure and yet so warm and human. That combination hardly ever happens with sopranos. Ottenberg sat down and turned to the doctor, speaking calmly and trying to make himself clear. This is an important passage. There's the voice itself, so beautiful and individual, and then there's something else, the thing in it which responds to every shade of thought and feeling spontaneously, almost unconsciously. This is what he saw in her back. That color has to be born in a singer. It can't be acquired. Lots of beautiful voices aren't uh, haven't a vestige of it. It's almost like another gift, the rarest of all. The voice simply is the mind and is the heart. It can't go wrong in interpretation because it has in it the thing that makes all interpretation. So Ottenberg is trying to um, articulate what it is that makes Taya and her artistry so far above perhaps what she had been and what others. Remember that, what was that little girl's name? Um, all I can think of is Nellie Olson, but the one that Taya competed against when she was a child. That voice is mediocre. It's okay, but it's Taya who can take it a step beyond. Next, down at the bottom of page 376. Every attitude a picture, and always the right kind of picture, full of that legendary supernatural thing. She gets into it. I never heard the prayer song like that before. A couple lines later, she's made to live with ideas and enthusiasms, not a husband. And we know that in order for her to get to this level of artistry, she has to forego everything. Remember the pathetic little scene where Mrs. Kronberg is dying and Thea can't leave because she would give up the part that she needed. And so she has um, forsaken virtually everything in order to get where she is. Um, let's see. At the top of page 377, that we have some German, and it is translated as "In splendid shining armor, a knight approached." Doesn't she die then at the end? The doctor says. Fred smiled and said, "Some else's do." Um, in my note says in Wagner's opera, Elsa sinks lifeless to the ground after Lohengrin leaves her in the last scene. Most of the source material for the legend provides a similar ending, but some versions leave her fate undetermined. For a discussion, oh no, we don't need that. So some Elsas die, but Taya's Elsa doesn't. She left me with the distinct impression that she was just beginning. And that's Taya's gift. Towards the bottom of page 377, it's the idea, the basic idea, pulsing behind every bar she sings. She simplifies a character down to the musical idea it's built on and makes everything conform to it. The people who chatter about her being a great actress don't seem to get the notion of where she gets the notion. It all goes back to her original endowment, her tremendous musical talent. Instead of inventing a lot of